Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. 5 most important breakout players for this Florida State roster heading into 2024. And a prerequisite to this conversation is this is not necessarily the 5 best players on this Florida State roster, right? We're not going to talk about Patrick Payton. We're not going to talk about A.Z. Thomas, guys that we know what they are heading into 2024. These are the players that, at least in my mind, if Florida State reaches their potential in 2024, these 5 players are going to be breaking out in the 2024 season for Mike Norvell and this Florida State program. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, the Florida State fans. It's been a blast talking this program, going back to the transfer portal, on the high school recruiting trail. The Florida State fans always show a ton of love to the boys. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, from the Florida State fans, I would love to hear your 5 players in terms of the 5 most important players that you want to see breakout years for in 2024. I think the most intriguing part of this conversation is this list could be 15 players long. I mean, this Florida State roster, yes, it lost a lot of talent to the NFL draft. That gives a lot of opportunity to some newcomers who are really good football players to break out for this Florida State program. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with my number 5 player, and that is Marvin Jones Jr., obviously coming from the Georgia Bulldogs. And why I think Marvin Jones Jr. is so important to this Florida State roster is this is a guy that can emerge as one of the best pass rushers in the ACC. He has all the physical traits to certainly do so. I remember talking about this kid coming out of American Heritage at the high school level. A lethal first step, a ton of bend and flexibility to attack tackles athletically around that outside shoulder. You have all the physical traits. Now you want to see him kind of put it together in the 2024 season. From what it sounds like in spring camp, Marvin Jones Jr. certainly looked like that guy. And why I went with Marvin Jones Jr. as kind of a top 5 most important player is you look at how important Patrick Payton was as that edge rusher too for Florida State in 2023, where you saw a lot of offenses game plan around Jared Verse, right? They were leaving tight ends to chip. They were leaving running backs in and pass pro. And that gave Patrick Payton a lot of unique opportunities to have a lot of favorable matchups. And you look at Patrick Payton's numbers, 14.5 tackles for a loss, 7 sacks. He certainly took advantage of some of those opportunities. I think you look at 2024, Patrick Payton is going to be the Jared Verse of this Florida State defense, right? Opposing offenses are going to go in to play Florida State and say, we got a game plan for Patrick Payton. We got to leave tight ends to chip. We got to leave running backs in and pass pro. And I think that's going to give Marvin Jones Jr. an opportunity to have some of those elite matchups. And can Marvin Jones Jr. capitalize on it like Patrick Payton did in 2023? That is a massive storyline, at least in my opinion, for Florida State. He's got all the traits to do so. You want to see him put it on the field for Florida State in 2024. And I'll just add this as kind of the last thing that comes to mind. I think a very similar storyline to Jermaine Johnson coming over from Georgia a couple of years ago. And I'm not saying he's going to go for 18 tackles for loss and 12 sacks, although I'm certainly not saying that can't happen. But you look at Jermaine Johnson, this was another guy that had first-round NFL caliber traits. He ended up going in the first round, just didn't get a ton of opportunity with that Georgia program. Coming into Florida State, having some more opportunity, I think meant the world for Jermaine Johnson. I think if you're Florida State, you kind of hope it means the world for a guy like Marvin Jones Jr. as well. Number 4 on the list, and we're going to go to the linebacker room and talk about DJ Lundy, who committed to Colorado out of the transfer portal way back in December, comes back to Florida State. This was one of the best offseason moves for Florida State. You look at one of the biggest question marks we have about this Florida State roster, it's at the linebacker position. Just not a lot of experience in that linebacker room. They go out and get Cam Riley, which I think certainly helps. You look at DJ Lundy, this kid's played a ton of football for Florida State. I shouldn't call him a kid anymore. He is a grown man, plays like a grown man, and has been with this program for a ton of years, has played a ton of football. And if he can be that true linebacker one that's going sideline to sideline, cleaning up a lot of plays, that kind of goes a long way in answering probably the biggest question we have about this Florida State roster. And you look at DJ Lundy last year, I'm saying he's a breakout player. He kind of broke out last year. He led this team in run stops. He only missed 3% of his tackles, had 54 tackles for Florida State. That was number 3 on the team. The reason I'm calling him a breakout player is I think he can emerge as that true linebacker one for Florida State, and they certainly are going to need it from DJ Lundy in the 2024 season. I think DJ Lundy primed for a really big year, and it's certainly going to be needed by Florida State. Going to our number 3 player in terms of most importance to break out, that's Darryl Jackson Jr. And obviously, we didn't get to see as much of Darryl Jackson Jr. as we wanted in 2023, but you saw him in the bowl game. And the biggest thing you see is the raw potential that this kid has. At 6'5", 330, he is that player you want getting off the bus first. He looks so physically imposing, and you've seen him play good football for the Miami Hurricanes in the 2022 year. Can he emerge as the game wrecker for Florida State on the inside of the defensive line? And I think why it's so important is you look back at kind of some elite defenses we've seen at the college football level the last couple of years. You look at Michigan in 2023, having a guy like Mason Graham. You look at Georgia the last couple of years, guys like Jalen Carter, guys like Jordan Davis. When you have that elite game wrecker in the inside of the defensive line that needs to draw double teams, that can create negative plays and kind of just blow a lot of plays up, I think it's massive for defenses to be kind of elite in the era of college football. And you look at Darryl Jackson Jr., and I think you say he certainly can be that guy. And if he is that guy for Florida State, that's a massive storyline for this Florida State program in 2024, going to the number 2 player and arguably number 1. But I have a number 1 guy that I think is really intriguing. Let's talk about DJU. And I think what's most exciting about DJU, and we've talked about him extensively during this offseason, DJU comes into Florida State, and I think the number 1 thing you're most excited for is, can Mike Norvell in this offensive staff work their magic that they worked with Jordan Travis? I mean, you saw Jordan Travis just take leaps and bounds every single year he was in Tallahassee and kind of maxed out in 2023. Can DJU kind of reach his potential for this Florida State offense? I think the most exciting conversation about DJU is if he does reach his potential, you are looking at one of the most talented quarterbacks in all of college football. We all remember him coming out of high school as the number 2 prospect in the country. Can he finally realize that potential in Tallahassee? This is not one of those stopgap quarterbacks that's going to potentially give you he's going to be a stopgap quarterback, right? And he's going to give you one really, really good year in Tallahassee. I think the question is, how good can that year be? And I think what's exciting is that year can be really, really good. And I think another thing that kind of excites me about DJU is he gives Mike Norvell in this offensive staff some more passing concepts to inject into this Florida State offense. He can access the deeper third just a little bit better than Jordan Travis. And that's not a knock on Jordan Travis. That's more just highlighting that DJU has an NFL caliber arm. There are some throws that you can ask DJU to make on a consistent basis that you probably just didn't want to ask Jordan Travis to make. Now, I think the big question for DJU is, can you find a little bit more consistency, right? A 57% completion percentage for Oregon State last year. You want that number to be closer to 65%. And it's probably not going to be over 70% because, again, DJU pushes the ball down the field, makes some high-level throws. When you're asking quarterbacks to do that, the completion percentage is going to dip a little bit. But can he be a little bit more consistent accessing those intermediate and short passing concepts? Can he hit players in stride, create opportunities to operate after the catch? And if he can do that and then inject some of those high caliber throws down the field, I think he gives a very high ceiling to Florida State's offense in 2024. The last player, and probably the player that I am most excited for on this Florida State roster, and again, that's saying a lot because I'm excited about a lot of these cats, is wide receiver Malik Benson. I think another big question, arguably the biggest question outside of linebacker for Florida State, is who is going to emerge as that wide receiver one, who are going to emerge as the pass catchers for this Florida State offense. Obviously, you lose guys like Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell. You look at Malik Benson. This kid has wide receiver one written all over him. And I think the big thing you're looking at is, can he kind of capitalize on that and become that wide receiver one for Florida State? You're talking about a guy that he's 6'1", 200 pounds, ran a 10.4 at the high school level in the 100-meter dash. This is one of the more physical freaks that you see in all of college football. Now, can he realize those physical traits on the football field? That's the big question. I think you have a wide receiver one in the waiting. Can he put that on the field in 2024? Massive storyline for Florida State. I want to throw an honorable mention in there too. And I kind of said at the jump that there are so many players that I wanted to talk about. The hardest part about coming up with this list is just kind of picking the players that I think are most important to break out. Let's talk about Jalen Lucas in the, I guess, the running back position. I'm just going to call him an offensive weapon at this point. Mike Norvell is one of the best coaches in the country because he knows how to use his personnel. And you look at Jalen Lucas, there are so many ways that you can get him involved in the offense to hit explosive plays. Can Mike Norvell find that perfect medium to use Jalen Lucas, right? Whether it's screens, whether it's end arounds, whether it's operating out of the slot as a slot wide receiver, there are so many different ways you can use him. I think it's a perfect fit for him to come to Florida State because Mike Norvell has shown that he is elite at using those kind of guys. I think back to Jaheim Bell last year. Jaheim Bell was one of those offensive weapons, and I think the conversation was, how do we want to use him? I thought Mike Norvell did a really good job using someone like Jaheim Bell. And Jalen Lucas is one of those guys that can make game-changing plays. Can you get him 10 to 12 touches a game that he can really impact the football game at a high level? That's a massive storyline for Florida State. Jalen Lucas, a guy I'm fired up for in 2024. He's my honorable mention. Those are the top 5 players I had in terms of most important breakout players for Florida State. I would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. A lot of different players that you could go with. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. We'll cut it there. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.